There's a kind of shame that many women carry quietly, and it's not always connected to, something they did wrong. Sometimes it comes from, looking around and realizing that their life doesn't look the way they thought it would by now. So maybe you thought you'd be married by this age. Maybe you expected to have children by now. Or maybe you thought you would own a home or have a stable career, be out of debt, or feel more settled in your purpose. But instead, you may be single, you may be divorced, or you might be raising children alone, and you still may be trying to recover financially. Or you might have that degree that didn't lead to the career that you had expected. You also could be working a job that pays bills while you privately wonder why your life hasn't moved forward in the way that you imagined. And after a while, like that disappointment, it becomes something deeper. It can become embarrassment. You may dread certain questions like, how old are you? Or are you married? Do you have children? What do you do for work? Are you still living there? And even when, people are not trying to be unkind, those questions can touch a sensitive spot because sometimes the hardest part is not simply that life is different. It's feeling as though everyone else can see that it's different too. And I understand that feeling. So like for much of my 30s, I was single. I didn't begin like dating more seriously until later in my later 30s when I had a couple of relationships. But for years before that, there were, events where I would look around and realize that I was still the single one. And there were seasons when other women around me have children and I couldn't feel fully relate to them in that area. And, other women had been, married, divorced, and remarried before I had been married the first time. And there were also moments when I felt embarrassed by where my life was. I knew that I had blessings, I had a career, I was taking care of myself. My life was not empty. I made the best of it. But I also knew that there were things that I hoped for and that would have happened by, that time in my life. And I didn't get married until I was 40. And I didn't buy a home until I was in my 40s. I still don't have children. I don't mind sharing my testimony because I know many of you have the same story. But I want you to know that I understand what it's like to look at your life and, wonder why it doesn't resemble the life that you thought you would have by now. And, if that's where you are, I want to say something clearly. That's that your life doesn't have to look like everyone else's in order for it to be meaningful. And I know that you know that on the surface, but the enemy whispers something different in our ears. So your life, it doesn't have to, follow someone else's timeline in order for God to remain faithful to you. And there's a moment in John chapter 21 that speaks to this directly. So after Jesus restores Peter, Peter looks at another disciple and asks, what will happen to him? He ain't minding his own business here, right? So Jesus responds, if I will that he tarry till I come, what is it that to you? Follow thou me. So in other words, Peter was worried about someone else, and Jesus was like, you have bigger fish to fry. You're like, right, Peter's the fisherman. I thought that was funny. Um, but um, but no, so Jesus said, follow thou me. This is still the call. Not, follow her timeline, not follow the life that you imagined at 25. No, not follow the milestones people around you have reached. Follow Christ. Comparison can make us believe that another woman's life is evidence against our own. So you see the woman that's married young, and you wonder, what is wrong with you? You see the woman with the home, the family, the career, the business, the vacation pictures, and the polished life. And you begin measuring your, private reality against the part of the story that you can see, part of their story that you can see. And people try to tell you, oh, well, you were focused on the wrong things when you were young, chasing a career, right? Being fast. And that's some women's story, but not all of us. So back to comparisons. So you don't know every part of her path or his path. And, he or she does not know every part of yours. There may be a woman who appears, financially secure, but is carrying anxiety that you know nothing about. There may be a woman who married young, but is grieving the loss of herself in a difficult marriage. And there may be a woman with, a children who would tell you that motherhood has been beautiful and deeply stretching. And there may be a woman with an impressive title who feels, disconnected from the work that she's doing every day. And that's not minimizing anyone's blessing or pain, but it's about remembering that comparison gives us incomplete information. It asks us to judge our full, complicated lives against someone else's, visible highlight reels, right? And that's not a fair measure. Sometimes shame, it also tries to convince us that our current circumstances is our identity. A woman may be working retail while she's, trying to rebuild her life after a layoff. And shame tells her that she's failed. That's a teenager's job. Or a woman may be driving rideshare in the evenings because the degree that she worked hard for hasn't opened the doors that she expected. And shame tells her that she's behind. Or, there's a single mother who may be doing, everything that she can to provide for her children. And shame tells her that her family does not look the way that it should, especially if she grew up in the church. And there may be the divorced woman who feels as though she has to explain why her marriage ended before anyone can decide whether she's worthy of love. And I can keep going, right? There may be the single woman in her 40s, and she feels as though she has to make herself smaller so that other people won't pity her. But your circumstance is not the whole story of who you are. It may be part of your story. It may be a place where, you need healing, wisdom, provision. You might need support or a new direction. So I'm not telling you that there's no responsibility or accountability, but it's not the final verdict over your life. Psalm 139, it says, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And that truth does not disappear when life does not unfold on your schedule. You remain known by God. You remain seen by God. You remain valuable in that season that looks impressive and the season that does not. And one of the things that, we have to learn as women is how to grieve without, turning grief into shame. It's okay to acknowledge that you wanted something different. You do not have to pretend that singleness has never been hard. It can be difficult. You don't have to pretend that divorce did not break your heart, or pretend that financial struggles is easy, or that a delayed dream does not affect you. God can handle the honest version of your prayer. He is not asking you to make your disappointment, sound spiritual before you bring it to him. But shame and the enemy says, no, because this did not happen for me yet, something must be wrong with me. And that is where we have to draw the line. So an unmet desire is not proof that you are unworthy. A delayed milestone is not proof that God has abandoned you. A life that looks different is not a life without purpose. God does not need your life to resemble anyone else's in order to work through it. And sometimes, he's doing things in you that are, but just not visible yet. So he may be rebuilding your confidence after years of disappointment, healing the patterns that would have followed you into the very thing you are praying for. He may be teaching you how to trust him in a way that is deeper than having every answer. He may be giving you compassion for women whose stories look different from yours. So we will not always understand, why certain things take longer than we hoped. And I'll never tell you that every painful delay has a simple explanation. But I do believe that God is present in the places where we feel overlooked. And I believe he can bring purpose, maturity, beauty, and fruit from a life that did not follow the plan that we wrote for ourselves. Galatians chapter 6 says that, but let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. So there is a wisdom in learning to, evaluate your life before God instead of constantly measuring it against the women around you. So ask yourself, am I growing in faith? Am I becoming more honest with God? And am I making wise decisions with what he puts in my hands today? Am I allowing shame to isolate me, or am I letting God meet me in this season? I'm becoming the woman God is calling me to be, even while I wait for parts of my life to change. Those are better questions than, why am I not her? Because you were never called to become her. You were called to follow God in your own life. And that path may include things you have not chosen. And as for me, and it may have turns that you do not fully understand. It may look slower than you hoped, but it is still your life. And God is still able to meet you there. So if you are in a season where you feel behind, ashamed, or unsure, and I want to invite you to my free webinar. It's called Waiting Well, the 3 belief shifts that move you out of delay and into divine delivery. So that thing you've been praying for. And it's designed to help you examine, some of the beliefs that can quietly keep you discouraged in your waiting season. Especially beliefs about your identity, your worth, and the way you think God has to work in your life. So the link will be in the description below. So I want to leave you with this though. So you don't have to be embarrassed by a life that is still unfolding. You do not have to hide because your story is different. You do not have to explain every unanswered prayer before you are allowed to take up space in the room. You can be honest about what you still desire. You can grieve when it's not happened yet. You can keep trusting God without pretending that the road has been easy. And you can stop allowing comparison to make you ashamed of the woman you are becoming. Because I'm sure she is beautiful. Your life may not look like everyone else's, but God still sees it. He still has purpose for you within it. And He is still faithful. So God bless you, Royal Ones. I'll see you in the next one.